All this week we focus on the CODOFIL story, le Conseil pour le développement du français en Louisiane. It was passed by the state legislature in 1968, and that, along with the vision of pretty many people from around Acadiana, pretty well set this organization on its course. But it was the goals that they had in mind that really established CODOFIL as the voice for the French-speaking citizens of Louisiana.
CODOFIL's first and primary goal was to establish an enormous infrastructure for the teaching of French in the elementary schools. Never before had French really been taught at the elementary schools. There was naturally French at the secondary level. And today there are more than 80,000 students who teach French in the elementary schools. And we want to assure that every school system in the state who wishes to have French in their schools can do so by requesting teachers from CODOFIL. And we make every attempt to satisfy the needs of parishes who need teachers. And we do have teachers from France, Belgium, from Quebec, and particularly from the maritime provinces as well. CODOFIL's second primary goal was to assure that French would be heard in the media. It's very important that there be French on the radio airwaves, and that people be able to recognize themselves, to see themselves on television. And that was one of CODOFIL's big goals. And we have succeeded in some measure. An important goal was to also have a French newspaper. And CODOFIL has been a sponsor of a bilingual and particularly, at times, almost an exclusively French document since its beginning, since 1968. We work closely with Creole Inc. and other associations like the CFMA, le Théâtre Cadien, Renaissance Cadienne. All of these associations and groups of people who are promoting and working hard to see that the French language does survive, and to work at being sure that people understand who Cajuns are.
Well, tomorrow we'll take a look at the many accomplishments made by le Conseil pour le développement du français en Louisiane, CODOFIL as we know it. I'm Jim Olivier with KATC TV3, Acadiana's news channel.
The Spirit of Acadiana Report is brought to you by these fine Acadiana companies.
On the CODOFIL story, in the last 3 decades, we realize that quite a bit has been done in that time. But what about tomorrow? And what does CODOFIL hope to accomplish in the next 3 decades?
In planning for the future, we thought that it would be very, very important to remember the past and to remember that in Louisiana, citizens of French descent were discriminated against because in our Constitution of 1921, it was against the law to speak French in the schools. CODOFIL, the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, was instrumental as a political force under the leadership of Jimmy Domengeaux and many others, such as Judge Babineaux and Dr. Bertrand and many others, to exert the political force necessary to make that change, to make the pride of the French heritage be alive in Louisiana again. And in 1974, because of those activities, the Louisiana legislature changed the Constitution, and that was adopted by all citizens of Louisiana, making a constitutional right to the exercise of our cultural and linguistic heritage. And we have decided, and the state of Louisiana, acting through Governor Foster and Lieutenant Governor Babineaux Blanco, have endorsed CODOFIL's proposal to celebrate the year 1999 as the tricentennial of the founding of the French colony of Louisiana. And we will have an opportunity later this year to send a Louisiana delegation to the World Francophone Summit in Hanoi, Vietnam. We have the support of Senator John Breaux in Washington, as well as Senator Landrieu, who have pledged their cooperation to make sure that Louisiana's tricentennial celebration will involve world leaders. And just as Jimmy Domengeaux sought to bring Louisiana French to the world, we hope in the year 1999 to prove those skeptics who predicted the demise of French in Louisiana wrong. And that as we enter in the second millennium, many of our citizens will continue to be proud of speaking French in Louisiana.
We certainly hope that you've enjoyed our series, The Spirit of CODOFIL, as it is such a big part of l'esprit d'Acadiana, the spirit of Acadiana. And we encourage you and your families not only to support, but get involved with CODOFIL. Join us next week as we look at, again, some of the many facets that make up the spirit of Acadiana. I'm Jim Olivier with KATC TV3, Acadiana's news channel.
The Spirit of Acadiana report is brought to you by these fine Acadiana companies.
Ago at a dinner table conversation, the question came up, what does CODOFIL stand for? And I responded with Le Conseil pour le développement du français en Louisiane, the Council for Development of French in Louisiana. And it was that question that prompted me to want to share with you the spirit of CODOFIL.
This was a brainchild of my brother Jimmy Domengeaux, who was quite a fellow, quite a successful state representative and a congressman and a very astute politician and a renowned lawyer. And he decided back in the early 60s that something was happening to the French language and the French culture. Basically, it was facing extinction. And he decided to do something about it. And his great expression was, if we save the language, we'll save the culture. And with that, he began. And I might say this, that a lot of the early portions of this endeavor in contacting people from French-speaking countries throughout the world, he spent his own money to get this thing going. And ultimately, with the help of many, and particularly Governor McKiffin, the Council for the Development of French was legislated. From that came the wonderful efforts of so many heads of states from French-speaking countries throughout the world, France and Belgium and Canada and even French Equatorial Africa, where these people sent, through the Legislative Act and through the permission of the legislature, sent these young people to come to our schools in Louisiana to teach French to our young people. Jim and I argued a lot of times. I always thought that this was too mild for him, but he says, I don't care about being a good lawyer. I don't care about being a good congressman. I don't care about being this, that, and the other. He says, I want to be remembered as the person who saved the French language.
CODOFIL was empowered by an act of the state legislature back in 1968 to do any and all things necessary to develop, utilize, and preserve French in Louisiana. Well, pretty interesting story on the development of such an organization with a big task like that one. Join us tomorrow as the spirit of CODOFIL continues. I'm Jim Olivier with KATC TV3, Acadiana's news channel.
The Spirit of Acadiana report is brought to you by these fine Acadiana companies.
Mais, Monsieur Olivier, vous reconnaissez que vous êtes le meilleur annonceur sur la télévision aujourd'hui?
Vous êtes très vaillant, madame. The idea of developing a source to preserve the French language in Louisiana and the influence to get that going was what we talked about yesterday on our segment. Today we look at the development of the source, CODOFIL.
To give you an idea of the influence that Jimmy Domengeaux had and the reason why this movement is so popular throughout the world, back in 1970, I think it was, he appointed me to go to France at the annual meeting that they were having for the organization known as l'IDF. And of course, we were all introduced officially. And after the official introduction, here comes this gendarme, and he says, Juge Babineaux, in French, he says, the president would like to speak with you. I said, with me? You see, oui, monsieur. So of course, he escorts me to the Président de France, and the first thing he tells me, il dit, dites-moi, Juge Babineaux, comment est mon ami, Monsieur Domengeaux? So this is why I think that CODOFIL and the French movement is so successful, because he got it known throughout the world, and he gave the umbrella of respectability to so many of our people here who were downtrodden, who had made fun of, because of the fact that they spoke French.
At the time it was established, it was pretty well determined that the success of CODOFIL would depend largely on the direction they took, thus the goals they had in mind for the program. Join us tomorrow as we take a look at some of those goals when the spirit of CODOFIL continues.
Et on veut surtout vous inviter de rester à l'écoute demain pour encore l'histoire du CODOFIL.
Parce que ici, on est fiers de parler en français. Jim Olivier with KATC TV3, Acadiana's news channel.
The Spirit of Acadiana report is brought to you by these fine Acadiana companies.
Of of CODOFILs all this week on this interesting and educational series. Part of the reason why we're doing it is to share with you some of the information of the role that CODOFIL has played since its beginnings in the 1960s. Its role that it's played in Louisiana and around the world as well, as it set out to do exactly what the act of the legislature said it would do, to develop, utilize, and preserve French in Louisiana.
I think that we have, first of all, a mandate for teaching languages. It's not French per se, though the majority of our schools do teach French in the schools from 4th grade through 8th grade. We have had for 17 years now a high school French club convention that has been better and better every year. Now we have students during the convention, the officers that speak in French during the entire convention speak to each other in French, something I never would have thought would have been able to possible at one time. We have, CODOFIL did about 5 years ago a survey, and we've been watching the census papers, and what CODOFIL has managed to do is to maintain over 2 or 3 censuses in a row the population of French speakers in the state at about 250,000, which is pretty good. We also are very proud of what the Théâtre Cajun calls the emergency program, which I think is very well named, the French immersion programs in our schools. We have, the first school to ever have one was in Baton Rouge, but now we have one in, we have programs in Calcasieu, St. Martin, Assumption, Lafayette, Acadia, and St. Landry parishes. It's very important. In these programs, the children learn all their subjects in French except language arts. We're also real proud of the prizes that Cajun French Music Association, working with them between the immersion programs, organizations like Action Cajun, the Congrès Mondial Acadien, Franco-Fête. These activities are wonderful activities that help to promote the use of the French language.
Well, tomorrow we look at the future of CODOFIL as the development, utilization, and preservation of French in Louisiana continues. Until then, I'm Jim Olivier with KATC TV3, Acadiana's news channel.
The Spirit of Acadiana Report is brought to you by these fine Acadiana companies.